For decades, we were told a story that free trade would make us richer, that the world would become more peaceful, that if we just opened our doors, lowered our tariffs, and gave up a little control, everyone would win. They told us borders didn't matter, that America was too advanced to need any manufacturing, that the future was digital, global, and post-industrial. But here's the part they never said out loud. This system, this entire way of doing business, wasn't built to last. It was built for a moment in time, and that moment is gone. We didn't just watch free trade collapse. We pulled the plug on it on purpose. And no, this isn't the apocalypse. This isn't about America going dark or turning inward. This is about what we're building instead. Because while the rest of the world scrambles to hold up a collapsing system, America is shifting, not running, not retreating, just repositioning. We're building something far more durable than a trade agreement. We're building a fortress, not a fortress of fear, but a fortress of strength, of strategy, and of sovereignty. A system that puts our people, our jobs, and our futures first. Because the era of depending on China, on unstable sea lanes, on international cooperation that never works in our favor, that era is over. And this new one, it's just getting started. Hey, if you're done with globalist nonsense and ready for straight talk, subscribe to America's Geopolitics. It's 1991, the Soviet Union falls, the Cold War is over, the enemy's gone, and the world is at peace, right? And for a minute, it looked like the U.S. had achieved the impossible. Democracy was spreading, capitalism was king, and Washington got cocky. Instead of reevaluating the global trade system, we expanded it. Not because it made strategic sense, but because it made some people rich. And this is the part the textbooks won't tell you. The post-Cold War global order didn't evolve. It was weaponized by elites who saw an opportunity to turn peace into profit. Let's break down what happened. China joins the party in 2001. The U.S. backed China's entry into the World Trade Organization. If we bring China into our economic system, they'll become like us. Free markets will create a middle class, and that middle class will demand democracy. That was the theory anyway. Well, it was dead wrong. What actually happened, China kept its authoritarian system, manipulated its currency to flood the world with cheap exports, used state subsidies to wipe out Western competition, and made itself the factory of the planet at our expense. From 2001 to 2010, the U.S. lost over 2 million manufacturing jobs to China alone. Entire industries disappeared. Textiles, electronics, tools, auto parts. And what did the economists say? Don't worry, those jobs are gone forever, and that's a good thing. And it wasn't just China. In 1994, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement. It was supposed to increase efficiency and bring prosperity to all three countries. What it actually did was gut the American Midwest. Factories moved to Mexico, companies pocketed the wage savings, workers got pink slips, and were told to retrain for a service economy. You can't retrain a 52-year-old tool and die maker to become a software engineer. But that didn't stop DC from repeating the lie. Even I bought this lie. Meanwhile, the stock market soared, CEOs got bonuses, and small-town America fell apart quietly. The religion of globalism by the early 2000s, free trade wasn't just policy, it'd become a belief system. You weren't allowed to question it. To even suggest tariffs or industrial policy made you a protectionist, or worse, uneducated. But here's what the globalists missed. Global supply chains are only efficient if nothing goes wrong. Dependence on autocracies is only safe if they stay friendly. And hollowing out your own industrial base only works until you actually need it. We outsourced our factories, we outsourced our energy, and worst of all, we outsourced our leverage. Because when you give up the ability to make the essentials, food, fuel, medicine, steel, you give up the power to control your own destiny. And by the mid-2000s, that's exactly where America stood. Bloated, blind, and bound to a global system it no longer controlled. Wall Street got rich, while Main Street got screwed. That's the blunt truth. Globalism didn't fail for everyone. It worked fantastically for the top 10%. Investors made fortunes, corporations cut costs, politicians got donations, academics got tenure. But for the working and middle class, it was an economic funeral march. Health insurance disappeared, wages stagnated, entire regions written off as left behind, as if it was just the natural order of things. This was not a minor side effect, it was the central feature of the system. And it left behind tens of millions of Americans whose only crime was wanting to work in their own country. This wasn't just bad economics, it was a moral failure. And as the 2000s wore on, a quiet anger started to build. People knew the game was rigged. They just didn't have the words for it yet. But then came the spark. The crash of 2008, and with it, the first real signs that this entire global fantasy was already starting to fall apart. By 2008, the cracks in globalism were no longer subtle. They were everywhere, and they were getting harder to ignore. The financial system collapsed under the weight of global leverage. Banks failed, credit froze, and millions of Americans lost their homes, their jobs, and their savings. And the global safety net we were promised? It wasn't there. No coordinated response, no global solution. Just panic, bailouts, and instead of asking why the system failed, Washington did what it always does. They acted like nothing happened. The truth is, globalism depends on smooth seas, stable governments, reliable shipping, cheap energy. But the moment something goes wrong, the entire machine locks up. Shipping stalled, demand collapsed, and suddenly Americans realized we don't make anything anymore. We couldn't produce masks, we couldn't make microchips, we couldn't even manufacture our own medicine, because nearly all of it came from China and India. That wasn't just a supply chain issue. It was a national security risk, a strategic vulnerability built by design. But what did Washington do? They doubled down. Obama pushed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. It was a 12-nation trade deal sold as a way to counter China. But in reality, it was just more globalism, more outsourcing, more power for multinationals, less for American workers. And Congress didn't even get a real say. It was fast-tracked behind closed doors. The elites kept selling free trade like it was a religion. And anyone who disagreed, they were mocked, ignored, labeled protectionist, or uneducated. But regular Americans could feel it. Their paychecks weren't growing, their towns were drying up, and they were told this was progress. While we were still worshiping globalism, China was playing a completely different game. They launched the Belt and Road Initiative, buying up ports, power plants, and shipping routes across the globe. They demanded that the U.S. companies hand over their tech in exchange for market access, which they never got. And you know what? Most of them agreed, because the stock market said, growth matters more than sovereignty. This wasn't just unfair trade, it was economic warfare. And our leaders didn't push back, they invited it in. Meanwhile, life for everyday Americans kept getting worse. Suicide rose, opiate deaths exploded, life expectancy declined for the first time in modern history. Wages flatlined, benefits disappeared, and the American dream is slipping away. And no one in power seemed to care. But here's the part that mattered most. Americans weren't blind. They felt it. They knew something was broken. They just didn't have a voice. Not yet. By 2015, the system was cracking wide open. The UK voted for Brexit. Nationalist movements surged in Europe. And in the US, a quiet fury was boiling over. A fury that DC couldn't explain because they were the ones who caused it. And then Trump walked down the escalator. And whether you loved him or hated him, he said what no other major politician had dared to say. This global system doesn't work. It never worked, and it's time to tear it down. But Trump didn't stop at speeches. He took action. When Trump took office in 2017, he didn't just criticize globalism, he declared war on it. For decades, Republicans and Democrats alike had told us, tariffs are outdated, protectionism is dangerous, global trade is the future. Trump threw that entire playbook out on day one. He slapped 25% tariffs on Chinese goods right out of the gate. Then came steel, then aluminum, then auto parts. Mexico, Canada, Germany, no one was exempt. Even allies got hit. People said, isn't this reckless? No one's ever started a trade war with the whole world before. But Trump wasn't trying to start a war. He was trying to expose the illusion. And it worked. The media lost its mind. Markets wobbled. Corporate leaders panicked. We were told shelves would go empty, that farmers would go bankrupt, that inflation would skyrocket. But what actually happened? None of it. Yes, some prices ticked up. Yes, China retaliated with tariffs of their own, but the shelves didn't empty. And for the first time in decades, America started to act like the superpower it actually is. Because here's the truth. We are the world's energy powerhouse, we print the global reserve currency, and we have military dominance no one else can match. For years, we gave that leverage away. We handed it to China, to Brussels, to Davos. Trump didn't just stop the giveaways, he weaponized our leverage. He scrapped NAFTA, a deal most Americans had long stopped believing in, and replaced it with the USMCA, a new deal that actually included labor protections, rules of origin, and tighter standards. You know, that old stuff. He didn't just fight China, he restructured trade with Mexico and Canada too. Suddenly, automakers had to think twice before building in Asia. Companies began reshoring to avoid future tariff risk. Even Japan and South Korea started hedging their bets. And quietly, without fanfare, American manufacturing started to stabilize. Now, was it perfect? No. Tariffs don't build an economy overnight, but they did something far more important. They reset the conversation. For the first time in 30 years, Americans were asking, why are we dependent on China for medicine? Why can't we make microchips here? Why are our kids graduating college just to serve coffee? And they were asking those questions out loud. Trump's tariffs weren't just about trade. They were a declaration that the global system no longer worked, that free trade had failed, and that it was time for America to protect its own interests first. He didn't wait for a global consensus. He didn't ask Brussels. He didn't clear it with the IMF. He acted, and in doing so, exposed something that terrified the global elite. America can function just fine without the global system, but the global system can't function without America. The tariff shock wasn't a bug in the system. It was a warning shot, a signal that the old world was ending and that America was already laying the foundation for the next one. Free trade is dying. The global system is cracking. But here's the part most people miss. America isn't collapsing, we're repositioning. And what we're building next is very intentional. This isn't isolationism, it's not retreat, it's Fortress America. A secure, self-sufficient, energy-rich, food-rich economic model designed to survive in a world that no longer plays by the old rules. And you know what? It's already happening. So what does a Fortress America look like? It starts with 4 pillars: industry, energy, borders, and alliances. Pillar 1, strategic onshoring. For decades, we outsourced everything because it was cheaper. But cheap comes at a price. In America, we finally figured it out. Now we're seeing a wave of onshoring, and not just from small shops. Big names like Intel, TSMC, and General Motors are bringing factories back to U.S. soil. Why? Because tariffs changed the math. Because supply chains broke. Because depending on China is now seen as a risk, not a cost savings. We're not trying to make everything here, but we're starting to make the right things here. Microchips, pharmaceuticals, rare earth processing, defense equipment, the stuff that matters. Things you don't want to negotiate for in a crisis. Pillar 2, energy independence. Fortress America is powered by domestic energy. We have more oil than anyone, more natural gas, more coal, and a growing capacity of nuclear and renewables. Under Trump, the U.S. became the largest energy producer in the world. Not Saudi Arabia, not Russia, but that's right, the good old US of A. We don't need to beg OPEC. We don't need Middle Eastern oil to keep the lights on anymore. That gives us leverage and security that no other industrialized nation has. Europe, they're still dependent on China, desperate for imports. America, we can run the system ourselves. Pillar 3, border control and resilient logistics. The global model relied on open borders and just-in-time shipping. The Fortress model does not. We're not selling ourselves off, but we're controlling the flow now. That means protecting the ports, rerouting rail and truck logistics, redesigning trade routes around regional hubs instead of far-flung supply chains. The southern border is being hardened, not just for immigration control, but for economic security. Pillar 4, strategic, not global alliances. Here's where most people get it wrong. Fortress America doesn't mean friendless America. We're not going it alone. We're just choosing selective partnerships that work in our interest. With Japan, India, and Australia, the E5, US, UK, Poland, Italy, and Romania, tightening bonds with Mexico and Canada, sort of, but on American terms. These are interest-based alliances, not ideology-based clubs. No more pretending everyone has to follow the same rules. No more defending countries that don't defend us back. No more global charity missions. This is real politics. And it's how empires survived when the old world falls apart. So no, America isn't retreating, we're realigning. We're building a new system, one that doesn't depend on unstable regions, unreliable allies, or rigged trade deals. We're creating an economy that can function even if the rest of the world doesn't. That's the American fortress. And we haven't even seen its full power yet. While America was building a new economic model, the rest of the world kept clinging to the old one, and it's not going well. Because once the US stopped holding up the global system, everyone else had to face the hard truth. They were never strong enough to go it alone. Let's start with Europe, the world's most advanced post-industrial society. Germany, France, the Netherlands, these countries thrived in the free trade era. They built world-class industries, exported to the US, and got cheap energy from Russia to power it all. But the second that model was tested, it cracked. Russia cut off the gas, the US backed Ukraine, German factories started shutting down, especially in energy-intensive sectors like steel, aluminum, and chemicals. Volkswagen delayed EV production. BASF moved operations overseas. France is rationing electricity. And here's the deeper issue. Europe never built redundancy into their system. They assumed the US Navy would always secure sea lanes, that cheap energy would always flow, that China would always buy. Now, they're stuck with green energy targets and no energy to back them up. And then there's China. On paper, still a powerhouse, still exporting, still growing on the surface. But under that surface, a crisis is structural. The property market is collapsing, youth unemployment has skyrocketed, local governments are drowning in debt, and the population is shrinking faster than even pessimists expected. China is running out of young workers, it's running out of trust from foreign investors, and most importantly, it's running out of time. They built their rise on access to the US consumer. But now, tariffs, sanctions, reshoring, and a hostile strategic environment, Japan, South Korea, India, Vietnam, they're all hedging against Beijing. China's Belt and Road is falling apart. Countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Kenya have defaulted on Chinese loans. Projects are stalled, ports are empty, and the illusion of Chinese soft power is fading fast. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the so-called rising coalition to challenge Western dominance. They were supposed to create their own trade blocs, their own currency, even their own financial system. But what actually happened? Russia got cut off from global markets. China's economy hit a wall. Brazil and South Africa face political chaos. India is doing well, but it's aligning with the US, not with Beijing. And the BRICS currency, still just talk, because no one wants to peg their economy to Chinese yuan. Not even the Chinese. The BRICS dream didn't collapse because the West sabotaged it. It collapsed because it was never real to begin with. It only worked in the world where the US was still underwriting trade and security. But in this new era, every country is on its own. Now let's talk about the Global South, the countries that were supposed to rise together in the age of global trade. Well, guess what? When the US pulled back, they lost their safety net. Egypt can't afford food imports. Argentina is collapsing again. Sri Lanka defaulted. Sub-Saharan Africa is falling into debt traps with no bailout options. These countries don't need climate grants. They need energy, fertilizer, diesel, and dollars. And right now, the US isn't rushing in with foreign aid because we're focused on building at home. Fortress America doesn't mean we're ignoring the world. It just means we're done carrying it. So let's be honest. While America is reindustrializing, securing energy, and tightening alliances, the rest of the world is fracturing because for decades they depended on US power while quietly resenting it, sometimes not so quietly. And now that we've stepped back, they're realizing just how much they needed the very system they took for granted. And here's the kicker, they still need it. But America doesn't. In part 7, we shift from the global to the personal because building a fortress isn't just about strategy, it's about sacrifice. We're going to talk about what this transition means for American life, the prices, the pain, the payoff, because reshoring isn't free. But if we get this right, it'll be worth every bit of it. Let's talk about what this really means. Not for Wall Street, not for policymakers, but for you. What does Fortress America look like for the American middle class? The short answer? It's tough, but it's worth it. The short-term pain? Let's not sugarcoat it. When you bring supply chains home, things get more expensive, at least at first. That $12 toaster made in China, it's going to cost $28 when made in Ohio. Some brands will disappear, some store shelves might look emptier, and yes, some people will need to retrain for new jobs. This isn't a slogan, it's a sacrifice. But for the first time in decades, it's a sacrifice with a purpose. Because for too long, Americans were told, if your job disappears, just adapt. If your factory closes, go to college. If your wages stay flat, that's just globalization. But none of that worked. We hollowed out the middle class in exchange for cheap goods. We destroyed local economies just to keep Walmart fully stocked. And now, finally, that era is ending. Now, the long-term payoff. Here's what Fortress America is already starting to deliver. New factories in the Midwest and South. Higher wages in strategic industries, especially energy, steel, and semiconductors. A resurgent in union power, especially in reshored manufacturing hubs. And most importantly, dignity in domestic work, because it's about bringing back meaning. For decades, working with your hands was devalued. Making real things was seen as low skill, and communities that relied on industry were written off. Now, they're the foundation of the new economy, the rebuilding of the American dream. This is what reshoring really is. It's a national reset. Instead of chasing profits across the Pacific, we're investing in towns like Peoria, Macon, Scranton, and Tulsa, places that built this country and were left behind. It means kids won't have to move away to find work. It means families can rebuild wealth where they live. It means the middle class actually matters again. We're seeing regional economies rise, Southern states building auto hubs, Midwestern states reclaiming heavy industry, Southwest corridors booming with logistics and energy. This is what economic independence looks like. Not efficiency for efficiency's sake, but security, control, and stability. Now, yes, some people are going to lose in this transition. White-collar sectors tied to global trade will feel the squeeze. Service jobs that depend on cheap imports will shift. We will all have to adjust. But for the first time in a generation, working-class Americans aren't being told to deal with it. They're being put at the center of the economy again. This is the heart of Fortress America. Not steel, not tariffs, not oil, but people. People who build, people who produce. People who have been ignored for too long, finally getting their country back. It's not perfect, it's not fast, but it's happening. So now, we reach the final question. What comes next? If globalism is dying, if free trade is collapsing, if Fortress America is rising, what kind of future are we actually building? Let's be clear. The world will still trade, goods will still move, deals will still get signed. But the terms have obviously changed. This time, America writes the rules. Well, I think we wrote the rules last time, but we'll see. The new trade model. Leverage, not dependency. We're no longer playing global babysitter. No more defending countries that send jobs overseas. No more importing from regimes that hate us. No more pretending free trade is fair when it never was. Instead, trade becomes a tool of strategy, not an ideology, not a sacred cow. We'll still sell to allies, still buy what we need, but every deal will now be made through one question. Does it benefit America? That's not selfish, that's sovereign. This is the end of the idea that we can offshore responsibility, that someone else will mine the lithium, build the batteries, ship the steel, guard the sea lanes. Because when COVID hit, when the Suez Canal closed, when China started weaponizing exports, we learned pretty fast. If you don't make it, you don't control it. And if you don't control it, you don't really have it. The American model is becoming the blueprint. Quietly, other nations are watching. They see tariffs returning. They see supply chains regionalizing. They see the U.S. economy realigning and staying strong. And they're realizing globalism wasn't inevitable. It was optional. And now that America's opting out, so are they. India, Mexico, Poland, Vietnam, all are copying the reshoring model because they know where the future is headed, but none of them have what we have. Energy, food, geography, capital, military reach, consumer demand. No one is better positioned for this new era than America. This is our moment. It's not about isolation, it's about independence. It's not about going backwards, it's about going forward on our own terms. We're not turning away from the world, we're just no longer apologizing for leading it. So yes, free trade is over. The global system as we knew it is gone. But what comes next? Control, strength, resilience, and a country that's finally putting its own people first. Because Fortress America isn't a wall to hide. It's a foundation to build something stronger on. And for the first time in decades, we're building again.